Am I in the frame? Good. Everything looks fine. Okay. What are we doing here?
Cut.
It doesn't work like that. All right. Anyways, wanted to film a little video and show you one of my favorite, and Rachel's too, favorite all-time venison meals. You stop standing like right behind it. It's like I feel like I'm talking to you instead of the GoPro.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Found this venison meal in this wild game cookbook, and I'm gonna show you how to corn big game corn venison. We're approaching St. Patrick's Day. I feel like Rachel and I always make this meal around St. Patrick's Day, and it's incredible. Wanted to share it with you. It's found in this Cooking Wild Game cookbook, which I don't even know where I got this. To Pat and Toby from Sherry and Ale. Dear Pat and Sherry, Merry Christmas, 1993. I think I got this from my dad, so I'll have to ask him who Pat and Toby are. But anyways, I'll just kind of fill you in. Corning is a method of meat preservation developed in the days before refrigeration.
After butchering, a farmer would cure the brisket or some other tough cut in a salt-sugar brine for several weeks. The salt acted as a preservative, and the sugar developed flavor and tenderness. Meat cured this way was called corn because the salt pellets were about the size of corn kernels.
That's what we're doing. Now, we do not need to preserve this and cure it for several weeks. This actually cures for about 4 to 5 days before you cook it. So keep that in mind when you do this recipe. You want to start brining it about 4 to 5 days before you're going to actually cook it to eat. What I do when I process my venison is I like to do cuts specifically like the brisket. So this is some tougher brisket meat that I have saved here. The first step for this recipe that we are going to be doing is we have to make the brine. Okay, so
In the saucepan, put these ingredients. We're going to heat just to boiling water, a half cup of canning and pickling salt, half cup of tenderized Morton's Tender Quick, 3 tablespoons sugar, some pickling spice, bay leaves, peppercorns, and some minced garlic.
I have those ingredients right over here. So that's the first step, is to bring this just below boiling to mix it all up. Then we're gonna let it cool before adding the meat into the brining bucket.
Half cup canning pickling salt, half cup of Morton's Tender Quick, 3 tablespoons of sugar, 2 tablespoons of the pickling salt, or pickling spice. I'm not really a big measuring guy when I cook, so you know, some pickling spice. I like to go with a little more. Some bay leaves, and some black peppercorns. It says 8. So, yeah, some of those.
And then, of course, it calls for garlic, but 2 cloves. Rachel really likes garlic, so 3 cloves of garlic. All right. Once that's all in there, we are adding 2 quarts of water and bringing that not quite to a boil, but just to help, obviously, the salt dissolve, sugar dissolve, pull out some of those flavors from the pickling spice and garlic. And at that point, we're going to just let it cool down, obviously, before adding the meat to it. And in the meantime, Rachel and I, we're going to cook some dinner with fish tacos. So that's what all that stuff is. Disregard all of this. I've done this in the past where I've boiled this over, by the way. You do not want to boil this over because it's a lot of salt and it's a big mess, as Rachel smirks in the background. All right, heated just to boiling as it says in the directions. Now I'm just taking the cover off and letting it cool. Might even bring this outside to just speed up that cooling process. Got the brine cooled, and I'm just giving these pieces of venison a nice little rinse. I've got like 5 different pieces of this. Like I said, I'm not using the best cuts of this. What's really nice about this recipe is you can use some brisket, some different tougher cuts of meat. It's really gonna get tender. Putting that in the bucket to brine, and then this is the cooled brine that sat outside for a few hours, and I'm gonna just pour that over the meat, give it a stir. This is just gonna sit for a couple days, 4 to 5 days, the recipe says. I might just come and stir it around like once every other day, 2 different times, just to ensure that that meat is covering the surface area of all parts of meat there. And next step, you'll see it getting boiled. All right, 5 days have passed. Time to go cook it. So at this point, here's what I'm going to be doing. I'm gonna rinse this, drain it, rinse it with cold water, and then I'm going to heat it up to boiling once, drain it again, put fresh cold water over it, heat to a boiling a second time, then reduce the heat, simmer for 3 to 4.5 hours. Usually it actually goes on the lower side of this because I use smaller cuts opposed to like one giant chunk. I didn't tie it like it says to do. It's unnecessary in my opinion. Draining this, I'm gonna rinse it once in here first. Cold water. Then we'll transfer the meat and new cold water over to the Dutch oven. Bring it to a boil. You can see these cuts of meat, they're firm, they're brined, hopefully all the way through. I used to do this with a rump roast, which is like the football roast on the deer, and I personally don't like that as much because I feel like that brine never gets all the way through. If you are gonna use a big cut like that, honestly, like slice it up, poke holes in it, cut it so that brine can infuse into all parts of the meat. Cover this with water. Bring to a boil. All right, I've brought it to a boil. Gonna just drain this, fill it up again, and then bring it back up to a boil before simmering.
Pretty much the only point of us doing that draining and stuff is to pull some of that meat out, or some of that salt out to start. If you only boil it once, you're gonna have it extremely salty because of how much, how heavy in salt that brine was.
An important part in the process is don't let it boil over.
Keep an eye on it.
Because salt coming off of a burner is not fun. Anyway, switched it over to this burner now that it's reached a boil the second time, and now we're just gonna have it simmering for about 3 hours. Like I said, it tends to always go faster than this, 3 to 3.5, or 3.5 to 4.5 hours, in my opinion. 2 3/4 to 3 3/4 hours, and then you add the carrots and stuff. So like, for me, it's usually about like 2.5. I go on this end of it, 2.5 hours. Then it's usually tender enough to add the carrots and potatoes. You could just do it this alone and then use the meat to make Reubens, which is what we do with the leftovers. All right, it's been about 2 hours now, and it's getting close. We're actually gonna take this over to a friend's house for dinner. So we'll bring the carrots and potatoes there and finish it up at that spot. All right. Carrots, onions. Rachel, throw those potatoes in there. Gonna be good. Simmer that for about 20 more minutes and really. Darla, come here. You were on a YouTube video, weren't ya? All right, here's the end result. Cook till the potatoes are tender. And as you can see, the corned venison underneath it is just incredible. Peels right apart, super tender. Absolutely love this meal. Recommend you try it out for St. Patrick's Day. Or any holiday, or any occasion for that matter, because it's delicious.